Welcome, everyone. Today we're talking about leadership development, but specifically, how do we get from insight into habit as quickly as possible? And with me today for this conversation is Steve Semler, Senior Leadership Consultant at Whipfly, as well as Learning Architect at Learning Sim, old colleague of mine from our old PDI and Korn Ferry days. So welcome, Steve. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Good afternoon, Ken. How's it going?
Going great. Thanks for agreeing to come on the pod. So before we get into the topic, though, would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and give us as much of your career story as you want to
give. Sure. Yeah. I'm doing a main job and it's like full-time engagement to help. My organization, Whipfly, professional services organization, help performance coaches, the people who are doing the people leadership work at all levels, from like entry level up through partner, give associates the performance guidance, the coaching, the am I on track, am I off track, what do I do? What do I do for my career? What do I do for building out my skills? Where can I go? Help the people who are doing all of that coaching do a really good job. So it's kind of coaching coaches to be good coaches internally. The other piece, kind of my side gig, is Learning Sim, and that's where I build simulations and scenarios and case studies to help people get into the learning and get results from it by being in the action rather than just sitting through courses and learning about it. So I've been doing those simulations for 20 plus years as my side gig business here.
Yeah. How did you get into it? I guess that's maybe a conversation we've never had. How did you get started on this path?
Yeah, I started off as out of college, University of Wisconsin-Madison, as an Army officer. So 4 years active duty, 6 years reserve. And I'm putting my psychology degree, believe it or not, to use with training and leadership development, and then the IT side of it, the technical side of it, especially with kind of the technical specialties in the military.
Cool.
And I got involved with coaching leaders, maybe 5 to 10% of the time, but most of it's on kind of the training, learning, development side of things. And then I just kind of continued doing that over my career. So like 50% has been inside of organizations, like individual contributor, consultant, manager, director roles, L&D, HR, leadership development. And about 50% has been on that external consulting side. So like with PDI, where I'd be building programs, be working with lots of different clients, but at a shallow level. Yeah. From solopreneur up to the international consulting field. That just, at this point, I kind of bring both the technology and the psychology around leadership development and learning together. And that's what I love to do, in fact.
Nice. Well, and today we're talking about going from insight to habit. I love how you say that, habit, as quickly as possible. I would say this is something that I've been particularly passionate about, especially going to some of the internal HR roles I've had, is, how do we move away from eventized learning with the kind of hope that people will take away something and put it into practice, to how do we make it practical, just enough, just in time, and like you said, turned into habit. So kick us off. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, kind of the philosophy behind it is this really isn't new, but our ways of making it happen continue to develop. I mean, we've been doing some really good, very in-depth leadership programs for a very long time. Center for Creative Leadership, PDI stuff, even Lominger, other Covey, and then Covey a little bit more recently, and things like that. And it starts off with insight. We help people understand what is the role of leadership, and or what's my specific job. And the more specific we can make it to that particular person and what they're going into or what they're facing, the better. But it's still just insight. And then we give them content. So here's what makes, research shows makes leaders effective. Again, it's just insight. Now I know something. Many programs stop there. Congratulations, you've completed a course in Introduction to Leadership. You know what to do. Go do it.
Mm-hmm.
Better programs, better solutions take the person into, okay, let's practice some skills. We've given you some models. Do the stuff.
Yeah.
Work with it. Try it out here in this training environment. Better yet, now try it out in the real world. Go back and practice it, and then come back together and we'll talk. Ideally, and this is where a lot of your stuff comes in. We've got a coach
Mm-hmm.
working with you as that leader, so that it's not just you guessing if you're doing well. The coach can help you figure out, how did that feel? What worked? What did you try? What felt awkward? Even if it felt awkward, what happened? What could you do better next time? So putting all that into place. But the challenge is still, okay, we've got the insights, we've got some skill building. I may have even had an opportunity to get coaching on it. If I just stop there and coast, it's not going to be built into the habit. So that when
Right.
I get into the challenge situations and I'm stressed and I'm not thinking about things, with that clear head as a leader, I'm going to fall back to whatever my habits are.
Right.
So what can the challenge I've been wrestling with for the last 5 years is like, what can I do to help these leaders come out of programs or be built into programs where they can do little bits of things that build up their skills into habits long term, a little bit at a time. And just by adding some kind of like on the job action steps and a little bit of accountability to it. And then, this really goes back 20 some years to the development pipeline model from David Peters and Mary D. Hicks.
Mm-hmm.
We've got that all of the necessary conditions for development covered, so that you're actually getting leaders who have confidence, skill, and have built it into habits.
I I like this because even in some of my own sort of custom leadership development design, my ideal model is a little bit of content, give you homework, go do it in back on the job, come back, let's talk about how that went, right? And even in my own experience with a cohort, with a group going through this, you know, 10, maybe 20% come to that first post homework session having done anything, right? And then that amps up over time. But where you're going with this is really interesting to me. It's the cool. How do we make sure you do this again and again without it being us telling you to go do it? Like, what is that trigger that builds this habit that reminds you of what you've done and practiced and appreciated of the results of that? So how are you, what are you doing to try to help build that habit?
Couple of things kind of depend, and whether you can use both depends upon your organizational culture or your situation, whatever it happens to be. One thing that I think most organizations can do, most kind of HR and leadership development folks can do, is little accountability pods.
Mm.
So first, you have to get permission in many cases to have a program that goes over time, where we're going to tap the leader and it's okay and it's expected, and the leader knows that they're going to be doing little bits for a long period of time in
Mhm.
order to build skill and habit. And then going along with that, just little 3 or 4 person accountability pods where it's not me, the instructor, telling you have to do this stuff for the next session. Yeah, you're meeting with your team and saying, "So, what have you done? Oh, I sorry, I didn't get to anything. Yeah, me either. Well, what can we do so that we're going to be prepared for this session because he's going to call on us?" So there's a little bit of that accountability built in, and by having it put with the peer group, then it can double up the effectiveness of the coach or the instructor too.
Mm.
So the accountability piece, accountability pods over time tends to nudge people in the right direction. The second piece is around apps.
Mhm.
So some kind of coaching or prompting app. I love positive intelligence
Hmm.
and their PQ app that's taking you through stuff that's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day max. But it's there in front of you. It's if you will turn on your notifications, the app will ping in your mobile device and say, "Hey, do this thing. Get some benefit for yourself with just like 2 minutes
Hmm.
twice a day, maybe 3 times a day." And that's reminding you and building the habit. Since we're so wired to our mobile devices anyway, why not take advantage of that as a reminder and reinforcement? And I get a little, like a drip feed of content.
Hmm.
So I get a little bit of content. I get to go out and practice it. I'm going to be reminded to practice it. I get points. I'm
Mm.
building up mental muscle strength in that. And I can flip back and forth between how many points have I gotten for practice today and kind of what's my charge, my mental muscle charge for the day. So some of these apps can get really very user friendly and
Hmm.
turn the development experience from a have to do it much more into a want to do sort of thing.
Nice. Yeah, something that nudges you, right, on some kind of a regular
Yeah.
cadence, right? Because I think one thing that, and I hope I don't derail where you wanted to go next, but one thing that was popped in my head is oftentimes we're teaching multiple things, right? We're teaching delegation, influence. I don't know. I'll leave it at that, right? That's just a couple of examples. So when you think about these learning pods or the nudges, how are you building it for the multitude of what we're teaching, right? Because I think, yeah, that's the thing that's popping in my head is how do we remind people of all the things we're trying to impart? Which, uh,
That's where the fun thing for me is that's where the simulations and scenarios come in,
okay.
because what I'm asking the pod to do is for this week. We've learned these techniques for this week. Handle this situation, or maybe you get a max of like three situations for your particular pod. Um, and so it limits it enough to a real world type of situation that I can see myself facing. Let's talk through how to do this. Let's practice this with each other, and say, hey, yeah, I had one of the, I had an employee come to me with a time off request. It was the day before they wanted to take it. They were already committed. How do you handle that? Um, and at the same time, there's enough of a little nudge in the instructions for that week, for that pod,
Hmm.
to say, consider feedback, consider giving the employee what they need, maybe it's situational leadership, something like that, so that you can combine some of the topics together and say, okay, here's what here's your application focus situation. How are you going to handle it? And then
Nice.
over time, you cover certainly the 20% of situations and scenarios that are represent the 80%, so to speak, of what people have to handle all the time.
Hmm.
And then occasionally you throw in some of the other critical ones, from a scenario standpoint, that they don't come up very often, but when they do, you have to know where to go to handle this correctly, like medical leave. So, like in Minnesota, if you're talking with an employee and they mention anything about like medical condition that may prevent or have an impact on their job performance, that's an immediate Minnesota law duty to report.
Mm.
And the company as a whole has 7 days from the time they hear it, they're notified of it, basically, to the time that there's an accommodation plan or an action plan in place. So again, something that doesn't come off very often, but that's
Yeah.
going to be in my list of scenarios for leaders, probably.
Yeah. Huh. So another question I have is how do you, wh- what have you found the hardest habits to help make, right? Like versus the easier, right? I think we're both teaching a multitude of competencies, skills, that we're hoping build into habits. Yeah. So which ones have you found to be easy for people to absorb and build into a habit? What have you found to be harder?
The easiest ones are basically the technical stuff. It's like, give me a tool and I'll apply it.
Mm-hmm.
So to a certain extent, feedback might not be a great example because there are a lot of complications to it. But give me a feedback tool, let me practice it. Then I'll kind of get with some comfort with it. The flip side is where doing the activity kind of runs counter to my like behavioral style or big five personality
Mm-hmm.
style. It's where it requires a stretch out of my comfort zone to remember to do it. Technically, yeah, in class I can give feedback easily. But back on the job, I'm going to overlook the need to give feedback. I'm going to be focused on the work. I'm not going to give the recognition and the positive feedback. I'm going to manage by exception and say everything's going well. Please correct this. But what the employee hears is nothing, nothing. There's something for me to correct. I must not be doing a very good job. Leader doesn't even know.
Mm.
Helping the person get insight into their existing habits. So where what we're trying to help people do with leadership goes beyond technical and into more mindset stuff. That tends to require the most work, be most difficult to change. Because again, in stress, we're going to default back to what our existing habits are. Many of those are coming from overused strengths. So,
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of, I'm thinking about the Hogan in particular, right? Where there's this whole list
Yeah.
of derailers if you do the Hogan Development Survey. And to your point, right? Most of those um, have strengths to them, right? That yes, this is where there's a real strength for you, but when under stress, this is where that's not great, right? So to your point, right? When you're under stress and pressure, how do you help people find the right mindset to remember, oh, but here's my go-to because it's just I'm triggered or whatever that is, and how I usually behave when I'm under stress, and how do we help people dial that back?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, kind of like mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
techniques, and really even that's kind of almost coming from like cognitive behavioral therapy, just examining. Don't try and change anything, but just be aware. What's your usual habit? Catch yourself doing your usual habit versus what you know is probably more effective. Don't kick yourself. Don't judge yourself. Don't force. Don't try to like immediately go and fix it, but just be aware of it. And then simply by being aware of what you're doing, interesting, you're naturally going to be more able to change to get to where it is that you want to be. So I found that to be a kind of an almost counterintuitive,
Mm-hmm.
but very effective for the folks I've been coaching and working with over the last 3 or 4 years.
Nice. So I have a question about Sims. Right? Because when I think of simulations, I'm either thinking of from the assessment space of we're putting someone through. That's all we're really doing is putting them through a business simulation for either selection purposes or development. Or I've been involved with a company. Shout out to Sidetrain, who sort of has this blended approach of what I might have originally thought of as a workshop, where they're actually bringing Sims into that high impact simulations where people are doing strategy discussions or um, customer meetings or peer meetings, right? And
Mhm.
we're giving them high impact feedback right then and there. So help me understand, how are you building Sims into this sort of just in time, just enough, just in time kind of approach?
Yeah. And I've been working with simulations since like 1990. So start off with in military training simulations even.
Yep.
But the core of it comes down to being able to understand what is it like for a person to be doing this task in this situation to a particular standard, a desired standard. So it's kind of a
Hmm.
task condition standard piece. Designing the experience needs to consider who's, it's it's traditional stuff. It's like, who's the audience? What's the challenge they're facing? Um, what's the trigger to start that story? So it's the storytelling that I go out then and find from the folks in the business. And I say, so why are they not doing it? What gets in the way? So there's a lot of coaching conversations I'm having with subject matter experts in a pretty short period of time. Typically, this is, I mean, for most of the simulations I'm developing, um, that information gathering piece is, like anywhere from 30 minutes to 4 hours, and 4 hours if it's a complex one.
Hmm.
If I'm building a business simulation with a lot of the complexity that people have to consider cognitively, then I need to draw in a lot more material. But the core of it is, what's the story? And kind of the 5-step simulation model is, you know, set the stage. This is a little bit coming from improv theater to a certain extent. So set the stage, step one. Get into the challenge, get into the story, step two. Um, solve the biggest part of the challenge, handle the big element in the story, step three, uh, and then figure out what are the next steps to wrap this up and take it forward into action, step four, and then reveal the result, step five. So as a result of what you did, given the situation you were given and the actions you took according to our standards, how would that turn out? And that's kind of a simple way of thinking it. Like, so for many simulations, there'll be like 2 or 3 scenes maybe in step
Hmm.
one, or 3 or 4 scenes in step three, and so forth. But it's all broken down into kind of, here's, you're going through a story. Let me help you write the story and then put people in it. So if they're a little bit more hesitant about role playing, or a little bit earlier in the program, this might turn out like a case study. We'll have them look at a custom case study. Best case is we'll have them look at a custom case study, and then the next morning, okay, now this project manager has been sent off to another project. You're the project manager. Here's the developing situation. What do you do? It turns to first person from third person. So that's part of what kind of the power of the scenarios or simulations or case studies is. It's taking a look at a scenario or story that feels really relevant and has stripped away extra complexity. So I'm really just looking at what's needed, and then giving some advice, and then diving into it first person, saying, what would you do? And here's the opportunity for the skill practice. So that can be big, or that can be kind of that little pod scenario, like I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. So how do you do that with a pod? I guess because not that I'm trying to have you give away your recipes here, but I I see simulations more being done in more of an eventized way, right? Even if it's a half day, right? So how are you breaking this up and kind of feeding this into? I think what you were talking about earlier is like a learning journey over time.
Yeah. Ideally, if I'm going to go for it with a learning pod, I'm going to give them a half page scenario and instructions. So it ends up looking a lot like an activity worksheet
Hmm.
that you would get inside of like a multi-day leadership program. Here's your activity. Your activity just happens to be, here's the scenario that you're facing, and then like 5 questions around, how do you approach this? What should you do? What should you be looking for? Try this out with each other, brainstorm through this, kind of work through this. Consider, I mean, here's where the role playing sensitivity comes in. Consider playing this out with each other in your pod. Um, what are your conclusions? And then what are you going to take back to action? you'll be reporting this back to the big group or to your instructor, depending upon the um, the program for next session. And then you'll get a different scenario coming out of that next session. And that session might just be lunch and learns. It might be just a sequence of like 1 hour lunch and learn length sessions, punctuated by the go practice pieces.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I will say one thing that came up time and time again from my time in HR in particular, where we were gathering feedback from different, leadership development programs from people. And probably the most common ask coming out of all these programs was more time with my peers, right? That oftentimes these programs are bringing people together that wouldn't get to spend a ton of time together in a not in the flow of work, right? It still might be a formalized thing, but it's not the flow of work. You're really getting to know these people. So I love how you're kind of meeting that ask as well, right? Because you're having them wrestle with the concept together in a smaller group. Probably I'm guessing kind of we're doing this sort of asynchronously, right? So they're meeting on their own time,
Yeah.
working through this before they come back to some kind of a virtual or in-person classroom session.
Yeah. And that worked really well at like UCare, the regional insurance, Medicaid, Medicare insurance company, where after an introduction to leadership program that was in itself kind of designed and built to have these three sessions, mostly around content, but also getting them together for their accountability pods. Then we gave them the option to continue in the cohort program. So, hey, you've been together with these folks. Now in your accountability pods and with this class together, now you're doing in that case, like 1 a month topic session, lunch and learn style sort of virtual thing, and getting together with your accountability pod to practice and just bouncing back and forth that way. So that gave and one of the recognized advantages that we had was across the organization. You're coming from different parts of the organization. We specifically want you to develop relationships with other people in other parts of the organization, especially because we're all hybrid now or virtual. So that when something comes up, somebody in IT, or somebody in claims, or somebody in plan design or something like that. So that your network, and now these are intro level leaders, so that your network can be there for you, and you can most likely even leverage that, as you stay with the company over your career a bit longer.
Yeah, that's a really good benefit when you're pulling enough people together from across the organization. I like that. I think the one thing I've enjoyed throughout the years is when you are bringing people together throughout the organization. So I'll pick on Buffalo Wild Wings, which I adore and loved working there. We would have restaurant managers together, so kind of manager level, so these store managers together with manager level people from corporate. And like one of my favorite experience that happened every course, right, was this realization that field versus corporate, had these assumptions coming in that like, well, your life can't be as hard as mine, or your days aren't like mine. And as they're sitting there talking about their challenges, it's like, oh, we're dealing with the exact same stuff. There's just slight differences to how I spend my day compared to you, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things that people pick up on and then they appreciate. It breaks down some of the us versus them. There's still like organizational silos and functional silos, like we do different things, but the experience is, we're all on the same team a bit more.
Yeah. Well, so before I move us into our final section, I don't want to make a big assumption that the listener base truly understands the why behind simulations in leadership development. So, as our foremost expert on this interview here on simulations in a leadership development context, just give us the mini, you know, why do we do simulations in this context, and why, what do we feel like the benefit is?
Yeah. The simulations are really the practice opportunity. So when we talk about kind of insight into skill, skill into habit, simulations are the practice method that gets people to be able to develop and practice and develop that skill way faster than either leaving them alone to try it on the job, and much more context specific and like relevant to people. This feels like my real work when I'm doing a simulation versus I'm just doing a learning activity, like a classroom activity or a ropes course or something where it's not
Mm-hmm.
particularly relevant to actual job performance. That's the key. You got to make the simulation feel like this could be real work.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously it's a fictitious situation, but I've had client executives come into like a capstone
Yep.
simulation experience, listen to the listen to the participants in their leadership development program going through some things and then making the report outs to the executive team, the sponsors, and say, "Wow, this is just like everything we face here. Who wrote this?" They were expecting it to be someone inside the company. Said, "No, that's Steve,
Yeah.
our consulting partner."
Yeah. I like, yeah, in my experience, especially in a leadership development context with simulations, you get like a little bit of skepticism before they get into their first simulation, right? That there's the like, this isn't real. Like, what are we doing here? And then as part, as learners are coming out of their very first simulation, they're like, oh, I've dealt with that guy 100 times in my career. Wow, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, without fail. Well, so let's get into our advice section of the podcast, Steve. So, the listeners probably getting tired of me teeing this up every time, so I'm just going to dive right into it. Which is, what's some advice you have for directly for leaders out there that they can take from this podcast today and put into practice?
Some of the best advice I've got for leaders working on developing yourself is
Mm-hmm.
going to be little bits of time spread over a lot of time. Do not expect to get better at something that you are not practicing, you're not trying to do. And at the same time, you don't have to make that practice big and hard. Like 5 minutes a day, 3 times a week, if I'm working on feedback or if I'm working on making better business decisions and considering, okay, what decision making method should I use for this? Let me work it through. Okay, I know I need to reach out to people. Okay, I'm going to plug in time on my calendar, just like a 5 minute reminder to do an outreach and a single positive feedback message. 3 times a week, just for a couple of minutes. Do that over the course of like 6 to 12 weeks, and all of a sudden, you not only have comfort with that skill that you're working on, but you've started the habit and it's becoming normal. And you're building that intentionally into your leadership repertoire. Catch here is that you do have to do it like a piece at a time,
Mm-hmm.
like a thing at a time. Don't try and tackle like, oh, well, this week I'm going to do this one and this one and this one, all like, for a total of 15 minutes. Make sure you've got enough focus to do this development and your regular job,
Yeah.
because your regular
Yeah.
job is the big habit that's going to win out.
Right. Right. Yeah. I love that. I saw this. I saw this graphic a bunch over the last couple of weeks on LinkedIn where there was this, they were kind of comparing um, sort of practice or training time to performance or execution time. I don't know if you've seen this graphic like wildfire through LinkedIn over the last couple of weeks, and they're comparing sports to leadership, right? And they're saying, it's interesting because sports spends 80% of their time training, practicing, I'm making up the number now, and 20% of their time performing versus 90+% of the time performing and 5-10% of the time training, right? And where I'm going with that is if you can spread that percentage out over time versus having it be, you know, the 3-day event, right? Your likelihood of building up is just so much higher. Yeah.
Yeah. The more special and different the learning event or the learning program feels, like emotionally
Mm.
gut level feels from your regular work, the easier it is to ignore everything you've learned.
Yeah, I like that.
So if you can somehow build this into, yeah, we're just going to do, we're going to just do some improvement stuff and work on our regular jobs, but we're going to bring in some tools and techniques and try them out and practice with them.
Hmm.
And, we're going to be a little skeptical, but be positive and optimistic about, hey, other people and research has said this works. Let's try it out. And then
Nice.
do that, like you're saying, spread over time.
Awesome. So, what's your advice for those who are supporting leaders?
Be wary of both the kernel of truth and the research-based inaccuracy of the 70-20-10 model. That 70-20-10 model of 10% of learning value or impact comes from formal courses, 20% comes from kind of informal talking with other people,
Hmm.
and development coaching, mentorship might fall in there, and 70% comes from just doing stuff on the job. There's a kernel of truth, but that 70-20-10 model really
Hmm.
isn't supported by research.
Really?
Really is not. No. What
Okay.
what what actually makes it seem like that is that the context of the learning, or the what you're doing for learning, has to match the context of the performance.
Yeah.
So if I am doing feedback, then I need to, then you might, that actually is where the model matches the best. I need to learn a technique. I need to kind of work it through with support and
Maybe
coaching. I need to
practice it.
practice a lot. Okay, well, what about project management or project planning?
Hmm.
Well, maybe it's just I get a burst of information about how to do this. I've got the insight I need. I'm satisfied. Now, 90% of my improvements can be practice, including some kind of reflective practice on it.
Hmm.
So there's an example of where it's 10, 90 instead of
Yeah.
70, 20, 10. But just, so that 70-20-10 model is deeply ingrained.
Hmm.
It's not entirely wrong, but just know that the research doesn't say what you might think it says.
Yeah, it's not as clean, right? We're not saying it's purely 10% is over here in a classroom and 70% is absorbing as you go. It's more the bridge maybe that's missing is the acknowledgement that until you're able to put into day-to-day practice what it is that you're learning, like the real learning happens when you're doing that, right?
Right.
When feedback's a great example, right? It's easy to train, easy to practice, much harder to sit down and do it because there's humans and emotions, right, involved, right? But
And
so
things like
truly the learn.
things like structured on the job training, where you're working with a mentor or a coach or somebody,
Hmm.
can cut out that formal learning entirely.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
And so, it might be 80-20
yeah,
there,
yeah, yeah.
or 70-30 there.
Awesome. Uh, I can't wait to hear from some L&D friends who are listening to this. I'll send the hate mail your way.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing, is I say, what's the grab bag advice? And this could be additional advice, or it could be, hey, if people want more Steve Semler in their lives, how do
Yeah.
we do that?
Um, I do. Like, we talked a little bit about the simulations. I'll give you the
Hmm.
simulation piece here.
Yeah.
Um, so that 5-step simulation method,
Hmm.
that's my own model, coming out of research that Corey Hill and I did at PDI
Hmm.
a number of years back. But that 5-step simulation model, I work with and teach people that for free. That's kind of like my service to the community. Here's some templates and stuff like that. So in the resources section of learningsim.com. It's like learning simulations, learningsim.com. You can find some templates and tools there.
Nice.
I sell the custom stuff, as side gig consulting pieces,
Mhm.
but there are like white label, like 30, 40 almost pre-made white label simulations you can get from trainerswarehouse.com or my website.
Oh,
And
cool.
that's where I sell the product and stuff like that. So you can just pick it up, get the package with things like obviously feedback simulations, like 90% positive, one thing corrective as a situation. Okay, leader, practice this. And so that's like pre-written stuff with like the task, the condition, the standard for the scenario. So
Cool.
there's a
I'll have to check that out.
tool for folks.
Nice. Awesome. Well, before I really wrap it up, anything else? What else?
Just remember the idea of blended learning. So people are going to develop knowledge and insight into skill,
Yeah.
and they need a place to practice it.
Yeah.
But if they're really going to make it part of their leadership makeup, they've got to get it from skill into habit, and that's going to take the little bits over time.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
help people keep working.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you. This was a very fun conversation. So I really appreciate you coming on the pod. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely welcome, Ken. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, take it easy.